Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
One, you must first accept that there is a problem. And we lay that out very well. And in fact, diagnosing a problem is the easiest part. The real question is, what do you do about it? And I think Ajay started talking about that. India cannot be, we cannot keep thinking about the central government. We cannot even be talking about the central government. But if you have a governance issue, we really must think about a wholly decentralized system of governance.
With India in its 75th year of independence, conventional policy is unlikely to combat the breadth of its economic challenges. Across a range of areas, human capital, technology, agriculture, finance, trade, public service delivery, and more, new ideas must now be on the table. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only cost India many lives and livelihoods, it has also exposed major structural weaknesses in the economy. A huge farm and jobs crisis, rising and massive inequalities, tepid investment growth, and chronic banking sector challenges have plagued the economy, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. It has also exposed the limitations of the Indian state, which tries to control too much and ends up stifling the economy and the inherent energies of its young population. Climate change is no longer a distant threat. While disruptive technology has huge implications for India's demographic dividend, in addition, the dangerous lurch towards majoritarianism will cast its shadow on India's pursuit of prosperity for all. In this episode of BIC Talks, authors of Unshackling India, Ajay Chibbar and Salman Soz, in a conversation with Ashima Goyal, acknowledge the hard truths and examine the question, can India use the next 25 years, when it will reach the 100th year of its independence, to structure not only its economy, but rejuvenate its democratic energy and unshackle its potential to become a genuinely developed economy by 2047. This conversation is an extract from a session at Bangalore Literature Festival 2021, which took place in collaboration with BIC last December. Now, over to Ashima.
So great to see you. Great to have an opportunity to talk to you. So your book comes at a good time. Thank you for all your concern and passion and many suggestions, excellent suggestions in a variety of areas. So what is your personal favorite? How would you, what is the one thing you think we should do?
Can we take one each? For me, probably for both of us, but certainly for me, and it sort of shows up in the title of the book itself, Unshackling India, is the role of the state. And I think the role of the state drives, economies at this stage of development very, very considerably. And so that features very high up in the book. And it's a thread in a way that runs through the book. And just not to take up too much time, but just to say two things about it. One is that we had the 91 reforms and we had quite a lot of liberalization of the economy at that time, and then it was followed up with reforms under the Vajpayee government. So we've had a good run based on those reforms. And there was a bit of unshackling, if you like, of the economy even then. But our main thesis here is that those have run out of steam, and that the Indian state is still very highly interventionist. In fact, we argue that it should be more interventionist in some areas like health and education, which perhaps Salman will talk about. And even defense, I would say, until very recently, until the Galwan incident, if you take out the pension part of defense spending, actual defense spending as a share of GDP was one of the lowest in the last 50 years. And now with climate change, we need more of the state there. But there's a lot of areas where we don't need the state. And while attempts are being made, like with the sale of Air India, which is a very good thing. And I think, as I wrote somewhere, it passed the litmus test for me. I think that's the direction that we recommend India to go. And the second aspect of the role of the state is, how still very centralized the state is. And of course, we've had finance commissions, particularly the 14th one, which gave more money to the states. But as I'm sure you are very well aware, what's really missing in India is the spending at the local government level. Shifting money from Delhi to Lucknow, where the state is 230 million people, larger than most countries in the world, really doesn't help. And just by way of contrast, we show that in China, which is a very totalitarian, authoritarian state, so to speak, at least that's the impression, more than 50% of government spending is done at local, not even at the provincial level or state level.
That's a great conversation starter. What is your favorite, Salman?
Thank you very much. This book is perhaps not necessarily about the pandemic. It is not. It is about the future. We see the pandemic as an opportunity. Ajay has talked about the role of the state, which is kind of the overarching theme here. And he talked about the unshackling part, which is his favorite. My favorite is the hard truths part, because India must confront reality. And just by way of introduction, just to share a little bit with you, which is in the book, because that's what really drives me, because I see it and I worry that we're not really grappling with reality here. Well, first of all, if you look at what's happened to India in the last 30 years since liberalization, income inequality has really skyrocketed. We're reaching Brazilian levels, and soon we could be headed in the direction of South Africa. So the top 1% in the last 40 years have tripled their income share. And in the bottom 50%, their share has almost declined by half. That's not good. When you talk about education, 80% of second graders in India can't read basic text, according to the World Development Report of 2018, which places us closer to Malawi, behind Yemen. Health, with stunting levels of 35% or 40%, how can we expect children to learn? It's mind-boggling that we expect learning outcomes and health outcomes to be better. It's not possible. Women, labor force participation rates approaching those in Iraq, Pakistan. We are wasting talent. We're just not enabling women to work. I mean, paid work. Of course, they're working at home as well, but they're not participating in the economy the way they deserve to. They deserve to. If you talk about the non-traditional things, beyond human development, new technologies, say between 2015 to 2019, China registered 500,000 electric vehicles. In the same time period, India registered a few hundred. When we look at R&D expenditures as a share of GDP, there is a K-shaped curve for you. China is going up. India is actually stagnating and going down. And we talk about modernizing the economy. We talk about natural disasters and increasing severity, the increasing frequency and severity.
We are really behind in a lot of areas, but what is the way to get out of this?
That's exactly right. What is the way to get out of this? So the way we approach this is, one, you must first accept that there is a problem. And we lay that out very well. And in fact, diagnosing a problem is the easiest part. The real question is, what do you do about it? And I think Ajay started talking about that. India cannot be, we cannot keep thinking about the central government. We cannot even be talking about the central government. But if you have a governance issue, we really must think about a wholly decentralized system of governance.
Right, and that is a crucial issue. But here, it is the states that have to empower the third tier. Many of them have not set up state finance commission. The constitutional amendments that they were supposed to empower functions and functionaries at the third tier level, they've not done. Raising taxes and delivering good public services. And then there's a lot of confusion because there's overlap in functions, like health and education are both central and state.
You don't do it by centralizing. I think the instinct to centralize is dominating the Indian political discourse. The central government is centralizing quite a bit. If you think about the following, if the prime minister sits with the state governments on a regular basis and says, this is the top priority for us is decentralization, and beyond you guys in the state government, we have to go to the district, then the panchayat. If we start pushing this more and more, in fact, the central government has to weaken itself.
Just to add two things, Ashiman, our book is not some press the button reforms that you do like tomorrow. Some of them can be, but so it's a perspective over the next 25 years. Two perspectives I'll leave with you, which are in the book. One problem, as you rightly point out, is that you pass the money to the states, but the states then don't pass it further down, right? And that is a dialogue that has to be had, obviously, between the center, the states, and local authorities. I mean, I saw the Prime Minister spoke to the Mayor's Conference just recently. So that's a big dialogue. And so the one issue is, okay, if the states say, I don't take my money and give it to local government, although they are part of my state, then say, let's look for other ways to raise resources at the local level or instruments that the local government has. And one of the big ones we point out is property taxation. That we have one of the lowest collections of property tax in the world, as we show. It's also a tax which is very hard to evade easily. And then a whole slew of user fees that they should be allowed that we point out in our book. Let's push states to devolve more resources to the local level, but also let's find and allow local government to be able to raise more resources. That's one. The other interesting thing that it's in our book that I'm very intrigued with is because I watched, I come from Haryana, Punjab area. And when I was growing up, Haryana was a very backward sort of state. And I went to school in Himachal, which was also quite backward in those days. Even the Shimla area was okay, but the rest of Himachal was not. And then came the split of Punjab into Haryana and Himachal. And those two parts of Punjab, or Greater Punjab, just took off after that. The same has happened to some extent in Uttarakhand. The same is hopefully happening in other, like Jharkhand and then the breakup of parts of Madhya Pradesh. So when we look at 2047 and we say the population of India will be close to 1.5 to 1.6 billion, my sense is that we need much smaller states as well. The states the size of UP, Bihar, even Maharashtra is just ungovernable. Therefore, we should have about 50 states in India with populations of roughly 30 million, because at that level, also the reach of the people to the government becomes much more amenable, tenable, and doable. So there are these two aspects. One is much more resources to local government, but also, and then of course their capacity building, but also this idea that states the size of 230 million are ungovernable, quite frankly. So I think those two stands we push in our book.
Right. We attended meetings with successive finance commissions through the year, and we've seen them trying to incentivize this delegation. So Why We Ready, for example, I think before that, Kelkar had made some allocations to local governments. Why We Ready felt that you have to trust them. So they were conditional. Why We Ready was trust, because the first conditional ones had not been taken up. They didn't have capacity, some of it lacks. But now you see this is 15 years. And now with NK Singh, again, they made it somewhat conditional. So, right. Because the argument is that how long are you going to wait for capacity to develop? Not going to develop by itself. Then one argument for not delegating powers is that there would be a lot of siphoning off, corruption, etc. But then they have to have correct good accounting and vetting of accounts. All those institutions have to be built up. So I agree with Salman and with you that states need to be carved up. It would be much better. They would become more governable. and they need to do much more at the local level in terms of raising taxes. But again, they have to be empowered to do that. And there, I think the big change required is this, this political competition. Have written about this a lot. This giving free whatever electricity. We've seen that state electricity boards are a huge drain. And we know what's happened in Punjab. The free water has really ruined the fertility, led to cancer belts, everything. But it becomes an electoral issue. Like now, the Congress plank is really free this, free that, again in the current elections. So, like AAP has promised 1,000 rupees to every Punjabi woman. Now, you're very concerned about gender empowerment. I think this is a horrible way to empower women. They're very demeaning to just give money and so on. I mean, if you include them in the political process. So, what is the way to reform this? And I agree that I've always advocated this interstate council that should become functional again, to learn from each other. They should converge to best practices. And some of that is happening with the Niti Aayog. They have all these indices and so on, but it's more about learning practices rather than just. Anyway, so coming back to one of the earlier points that you need the government to do more, but you need the government to do less, right? So, I mean, this liberalization process has been about liberalization, exactly that, and reforms, all kinds. So I think the low-hanging fruit in reform, something that the central government could just change a law, or has been more or less done. But the really difficult ones are land, labor, maybe agriculture, where a large number of people are involved who benefit from the current system. It might be short-term benefits, but still they're benefits and they're not willing to give them up. So that's a political issue. I mean, India has always advised this, that these reforms are essential prerequisites. If firms are too small because of labor laws, they would grow beyond it, etc. But how do you do it without, we've seen the kind of protests that happened over the farm laws.
Politicians have the capacity to sit with the electorate and have a reasonable conversation about issues. And people are sufficiently bright, they know their self-interest. So let me just give you an example from Baramulla, which is in North Kashmir. If you go to the upper reaches of Baramulla, you will find that parents are sending their children to budget private schools, 300 rupees a month or whatever. But when you sit with them and at the local level and you tell them, look, this is a tax because you have government schools. I'll get, in the book, I give this example of this village, which is my favorite example, Bandi Pai. Sometimes the issue is not really public finances. Sometimes it is about how we simply do not use them well. Bandi Pai is 1 kilometer long, half a kilometer is wide. It has 8 government schools. It has a high school, 3 middle schools, and 4 primary schools. Yet, parents are sending their children to budget private schools. It is a tax on those parents. When they do not have proper medical facilities provided by the government, then they send them to private clinics and all that. That is a tax on them. And you can talk to them. You can have a conversation at the local level about what this really means for them. Then you don't need to always say handouts and this and that. And people understand. I think what we do not appreciate is how much a civil and respectful dialogue can mean. And I think that is what, to my mind, I think that we need to do more of. Political parties can do more of that. And I think that is a winning argument. But I think we just don't trust that. And I think that is why we've run into trouble with the farm laws. Otherwise, to my mind, building consensus for these kinds of laws is extremely important for India's future, whether it is land, whether it is labor, whether it is agriculture. But it must have, this is a long-term process, but we need to invest proper time in a respectful dialogue with the stakeholders, I think.
Respectful dialogue is missing. The opposition will oppose, the government will blame, and then you have people also who are, somewhat like the US, who are polarized in terms of pro and anti. it's impossible to listen to those kind of things. They're so bitter and attacking, and they're not about reasoned debate, not about trying to find out what is best for the people, but about triggering their emotions and making them side with one or the other. So how can that change?
I'm not no political expert here, Ashima, but my sense is that I think elections is a great thing that we have, because what it does is that, okay, you might say this party is giving this freebies and this and that and the other, but in the end, the electorate is pretty smart. And when development delivers, and you've seen again and again that states in which governments have delivered reasonably for the people have been re-elected. Many of these reforms that we are now going to have to grapple with, land, labor, farm. I mean, the farm law is an example of how not to do reform.
One issue I wanted to flag was that, that India has outperformed expectations in this COVID period. Before that, because things were going down steadily, people felt things would collapse and major changes need to be made before it can do better. But it seems to be doing better. And I think that points to two facts. One, that a lot of reforms were done even in the period of slowdown. The essential, like the improvements in the financial sector. The financial sector has turned out to be pretty robust through this period. It was expected, NPAs were expected to worsen and so on. And the recovery has been sort of better than expected. So maybe it is that it's easier to reform when you have growth. You have some surplus, and otherwise things become very constrained, very tight. But then sometimes in the other earlier high growth period in the 2000s, it was just spent because you have the bonanza, you spend it, you don't save it, you don't reform. So it's like you come to some median, you learn. Then perhaps, this expectations that we can do better, without having to do a whole lot of things that are very difficult to do better.
Well, I hope your optimistic scenario is right. But before the pandemic, we were going down for 6-7 quarters, and the growth rate had reached almost 4%. So I don't see any particular reason why after this bounce this year, we will be back to some 7-8% growth trajectory. The reforms that you mentioned and the financial sector, I mean, I think, I don't know what the extent of the problems there are. I mean, a lot of it is now hidden by forbearance, but I'm not that optimistic as you seem to be of the projections on growth post-pandemic. Of course, you have this recovery this year, but unless some major reforms are done, these reforms now require a broad framework from the center, but a lot of experimentation should be allowed at the state level to carry on with these reforms, whether it's and also the same applies to education, as Salman points out. The national education policy is fine, but you have to allow the states now to have flexibility to be able to implement it in a way that will work in their states.
I've seen the IMF's projections as well. But my concern is that the way we are measuring things since demonetization, I think we're leaving many people behind. The economy is not capturing the pain of millions of Indians. I think there are some people who are definitely benefiting. For the most part, I think people are not doing well. Hunger is up. Poverty is up. The reversal in poverty is, to my mind, extremely worrisome.
But there are attempts to build assets for people, to give them, houses.
I hope what you say is correct. But it seems so far, on balance, I think this is a very unbalanced recovery. And I'm not sure we can sustain this beyond maybe at 5%, maybe at 6%. But that's not what India needs. India needs double-digit growth if we are to ever catch up with the likes of China. If we really want to be prosperous, we need to include everybody. And I don't think we're doing that right now.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.